Hey there, welcome to SI Now. It is Monday, November 28th, and I'm Maggie Gray. From sheer joy and happiness on Saturday afternoon to fear and panic Monday morning. Police in Columbus, Ohio confirmed that an attacker has been killed by authorities on the Ohio State University campus. Early reports say that 8 people are being treated for injuries, none of which are life-threatening. The attack, which at first was reported as a shooting, is now believed to have been a man wielding a large knife. He may have also driven his car into a crowd. This took place at 19th and College. That's 6 blocks from the football stadium. And senior writer Pete Thamel is in Columbus, Ohio, and joins me now. Pete, tell us what is happening from your vantage point.
Maggie, it's a surreal scene here in Columbus. When the news broke earlier today, I was downtown at my hotel and just sort of followed along like everybody else in shock and horror on Twitter. This was obviously just the epitome of collegiate joy here on Saturday, and really a dark pall has just been cast over the whole campus and city because of this tragedy.
You are on campus for the game and now Monday morning to do some follow-up reporting. Have you heard anything from the athletic department?
You know, other than that, they didn't feel it was appropriate to do interviews today. I really haven't, and I obviously agreed with that 1,000%. This is, it's obviously just a tragic time for Ohio State and its campus.
We know that the lockdown has been lifted. From where you are you seeing people walking around? Are they able to move easily from building to building?
So I drove by campus a little while ago, Maggie, and one of the main areas right near the football stadium, there were police cars blocking off the area, kind of going over towards High Street, where there's the bookstore and Panera and just some of the normal places where you go. And, you know, I noticed just a lot of students walking, looking at their phone, on their phone, texting people. There was, just a shock and concern. And, you could see the ambulances and you could see the police cars. It was a very, very stark, surreal scene.
Stark, yes, compared to Saturday afternoon, no doubt about that, and a normal day on a college campus. You know, Pete, football players have a very high profile on a college campus, especially one like Ohio State. Do we know if everyone is safe from the football team?
I haven't heard anything otherwise, but I don't know that formally, Maggie.
Okay. And so how long do you plan to stick around, and what's the move going forward for you?
It's a great question. I really don't know. I really don't know. I have a flight out tonight, and I'm probably going to take that unless something changes. I think everyone's a little bit paralyzed here, just in shock and fear.
Yeah, rightfully so. And Pete, we hope that you stay safe, and also wishing and giving our thoughts to everyone at Ohio State. Thanks for joining us to give us a little bit about what's happening in Ohio State. It sounds like a very just panicky scene, and we're wishing everyone the best there.
It's very raw, Maggie. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. Of course, Ohio State coming off a massive high after beating Michigan. Now the unthinkable has happened. As I said before, our thoughts are with those at Ohio State. And it can seem very trite to talk about sports at a time like this, but we are a sports show, and there really is no easy transition here. Earlier today, I spoke with Joe Neeson about the college football playoff landscape. Only one thing is certain in college football. Alabama is number one. After that, the possibilities are nearly endless. Let's discuss some potential outcomes and the raging debate over how many teams should get in from the Big Ten with college football writer Joe Neeson. Joan, good to see you. Which other 3 teams besides Alabama do you expect to round out the top 4 in the college football playoff rankings on Tuesday?
I think we're probably going to get Ohio State, Clemson, and Washington, which I think most people would probably predict at this point. Obviously, we had a crazy weekend last weekend, but I don't think it really shook up that those are the 3 teams that kind of follow Alabama.
Okay, so looking forward to the conference championship games that will be coming up this weekend. What is the biggest wrinkle that could affect those top 4 teams?
There are so many, even though we have some different teams and maybe not the teams we expected in those games. You look at, obviously, Washington and Clemson are the favorites in their title games. But if either of those 2 teams loses, I think that paves a path for a second Big Ten team. I also think if either Penn State or Wisconsin, if one of those teams went out and won big and really dominated, I think that could also, that plays in as well. Obviously, I do think we need a favorite to lose. But, depending on what happens in that Big Ten game, I think we could get a second Big Ten team among those four. It just doesn't, it's hard to say who. It's hard to say if it's Michigan, who's not even playing, if it's Penn State or Wisconsin, who blows the other one out. There's so many options here.
Okay, the directive to the College Football Playoff Committee is to pick the best 4 teams, period. But the committee has never been in a situation where they've had to choose between a conference champion and another strong team in that same conference. So let's play out some scenarios. If Penn State wins the Big Ten championship, what do you think the committee will do?
It's so hard to say where they're going to go. And I think the same goes for if Wisconsin wins. I mean, both of those are 9-2 teams who have been, really dominant this year, both of whom I don't think either of us predicted would be. No one saw this Big Ten championship game coming. But I really do think you have to look at both those teams and their strength of schedule. Just those, they have, week after week been playing in probably the toughest conference in college football this year. And I mean, Wisconsin, look at what they did against Michigan and Ohio State. You look at Penn State, who beat Ohio State. There's a lot going for them in terms of strength of schedule, which the committee has come out and said that's very important. I think that was part of their justification for putting Texas A&M in there in the first rankings. So I really do think, I think strength of schedule is probably the biggest determinant here, even if we are going to say we're looking at those champions as well. That's the thing that they have going for them.
Joan, could the case be made that if Penn State wins the Big Ten championship, if Clemson wins the ACC, and if Washington wins the Pac-12, that Ohio State should not be in the top 4 at all?
I have a hard time seeing that play out. I think, obviously there's an argument there, but with what Ohio State's done this season, I mean, it's in the end, I don't want to say fluky that they're not in the championship game, but, Penn State was better one night. On the whole, Ohio State was the better team this season. Honestly, of the 2 teams in the Big Ten championship game, I think Wisconsin's a better team than Penn State. So it's the rankings are so jumbled up here, and it's such a strange kind of turnout. But I think Ohio State really does have its spot sewn up.
It's interesting. Is there a precedent that you think will be set this season?
I think this season we are going to look back on it. I don't know what it's going to be because we can't predict what the playoff committee is going to do. But I think, if they go for one of those champions, if they do pick if we pick a second Big Ten team from one of those, whether it's Penn State or Wisconsin, that says something for the value of a conference championship. And we know the committee values that, obviously, with the Big 12 and, their lack of a championship game over these past few years. And if they put a Michigan in, that says something for, your regular season, maybe counts more than that championship game. So it'll be very interesting to see. But I think we will be referring back to this season when we go forward next year and the year after, just kind of as a reference point.
How likely do you think it is that Michigan would get in along with Ohio State and the Big Ten champion would be left out?
I think it's a long shot. I think the committee does seem to value those championship games. However, if that's a really uninspiring game, if Wisconsin and Penn State both come out and just look really lackluster, which I think could happen, those are both teams that sort of play to the level of their competition a lot of times. So it could happen. And then, say we see an upset, say we see a Colorado win, or we see Clemson lose, we see any of those scenarios. I think Michigan does obviously still have a chance, but it would take several factors, I think, swinging their direction.
Joan, is there a clear-cut scenario in which everyone could agree that the College Football Committee, Playoff Committee got it right?
I think the clearest way for that to happen is we see the favorites win out this weekend. Then I don't think there's much of an argument for, doing anything but keeping those 4, assuming they're the 4 tomorrow. But I don't know that that's going to happen. I think this season's been so crazy. It's hard to bank on that happening.
Which team is going to be the most disappointed, do you think, once the final college football playoff rankings are released?
It's got to be Michigan. Looking at the hype surrounding them this season, what they did all year, how strong their schedule was and the games they won, and then to lose to Iowa, who's kind of played spoiler in the Big Ten. They, beating Nebraska last week, but that's, when that's what dooms your hopes. Obviously the loss to Ohio State on Saturday was, obviously I'm sure they were crushed by it, but that's not the loss that defines your season. It's that Iowa loss. And that's the team to me it's going to be kicking itself if that's how it shapes up.
Joan, don't go anywhere. We have plenty of college football coaching news we want to get into. Tom Herman goes to Texas, and one high-profile offensive coordinator could be switching teams in the SEC. But first, let's check in with Ryan Aselta and Chris Canty with a look back at Week 12 in the NFL. Hey, guys.
Well, talk about saving the best for last. The Thanksgiving Day weekend of football finished up with arguably, Chris, the game of the year in Denver, and that's where we're going to kick off Canty's Corner today. Despite a ton of point production, the Chiefs and Broncos showed that defense is still the best offense. Kansas City wins the game in overtime, but let's talk about the D, especially when it comes to Von Miller and Justin Houston, who has clearly returned from that knee injury. In today's offensive-heavy NFL, Chris, how impressed were you with what those two players were able to do last night on each side of the ball?
Well, they were definitely dominant performances by both Justin Houston and Von Miller. Justin Houston coming back a week ago against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Didn't really feel like himself, but he certainly got back to that last night, trying to outduel Von Miller and that Denver Broncos defense, do his part in terms of being able to give Kansas City an edge in that game. A critical matchup for the AFC West in terms of where they're jockeying for position in that division, one of the most competitive divisions in football. But those two guys put on a show last night, 20 tackles and 6 sacks combined, both of those two guys. Impressive game. But when we rewind the sequence at the end of the game, when the Denver Broncos had the ball on the edge of field goal range, I thought on that 4th down they might have should line up and go try to hard count and draw the Kansas City defense offside, maybe get a cheap 5 yards, which changes your options for head coach Gary Kubiak. But they didn't, and they decided to go for the long field goal. They missed it and gave the ball to Kansas City at midfield position, and then it made it easy for Kansas City to make a couple of plays, drive the ball down for a Cairo Santos field goal, and that ended up being the game winner.
Yeah, Kubiak had options. None of them were really great in that situation.
They weren't. But here's the thing. If you're hard count and the defense doesn't jump off sides, you take the delay of game penalty and you punt it away. No harm, no foul. But I think you've got to play the field position game in such a critical moment in overtime. Again, it's a divisional matchup and at home for the Denver Broncos. So it's a situation where you try to play for the tie at home, and when you're on the road, you go for the win. You've got to be more conservative in that situation. I thought he should have tried to draw the defense offside, maybe get a cheap 5 yards with a hard count. But again, you can always second guess. Hindsight is 2020.
Let's get now to the main event. Ding, ding, ding. It should be a headliner in Vegas. Josh Norman versus Dez Bryant. The two went at it during the game on Thanksgiving Day. The Cowboys win over the Redskins. And the war of words did not stop there. It escalated over the weekend. Dez had some choice words for Norman, saying Washington should want their money back, clearly playing off of what Norman had said about Dez back when he was playing with the Panthers. When you look at these two, Dez, not a whole lot of production in this game. Norman's big gripe was you can't come talking if you're not going to show up for the matchup. Is this back and forth good for this rivalry?
I think it is. I mean, the trash talking, as long as they keep it on the field, I think it's great for football. You like to see two top competitors going at it, two top players respectively at their positions. So, I mean, when Dez and Josh Norman are going back and forth, I love to see the matchup, the game within the game that they play, and especially when you consider the NFC East rivalry that is the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Redskins, a storied rivalry, and now it has relevance in terms of playoff implications. You like to see that as a primetime stage Thanksgiving. I was all about it. I love seeing it. Dez Bryant had a relatively quiet game, so to speak, 5 catches for 70 yards. But the production in terms of what he brings to the table, being able to provide a deep threat element, changes the way that the Washington Redskins team has to play defense. So I've got to say, through the matchup with Dez Bryant and Josh Norman, advantage Dez Bryant.
It'll be fun to see a Washington-Dallas playoff matchup.
That would be fun.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Are the New England Patriots pretenders? For weeks, we've thought the Pats are the cream of the crop in the AFC, though over the last 2 weeks, 2 of the worst teams in football have hung with them. Last week, it was the Niners. This week, the Jets had Tom Brady and company down with under 2 minutes to play in the game. Chris, has New England shown a few weak spots in their armor at this point over the last couple weeks against 2 of really the worst teams in football here?
Well, I think they showed a little bit of a chink in the armor yesterday against the New York Jets. Tom Brady came out. He started out slow. He had the knee injury coming into the game. He was 3 of 9 in the first quarter for 19 yards, but you started to see him heat up in that second quarter, being able to make those plays. Again, a lion's share of his passes were less than 5 yards down the field. So they were trying to go with those high percentage throws, establish some kind of rhythm offensively. But I think what we see with this New England Patriots team and Bill Belichick, they understand how to execute in the critical moments in situational football. And down the stretch in that game against the New York Jets on the go-ahead drive, you saw what Tom Brady was able to do on the 4th and 1, being able to get the ball out to James White immediately out of the backfield. James White took an angle to the first down marker. Although they don't get any style points for beating a mediocre Jets team, they got the job done. And I think this team having confidence to be able to perform at that level in those critical situations bodes well for them in December and moving on into the playoffs in January.
The mighty LA Rams are up next for the Patriots in Week 13.
It's a get-right game.
Yeah. All right, our last topic. Oh, no for the coaches in Ohio. Despite falling to 0-12 on the season, Browns head coach Hugh Jackson claims he will return next season and fix the franchise. Jackson said, quote, "I'm going to be here, and I have said to you guys before, please. So let me go on record of saying that I have the full support of owners Jimmy and Dee Haslam and Sashi Brown and his crew. We are not apart or splintered or whatever term you guys want to use. There is none of that going on." Chris, if the Browns continue to lose here, how realistic is it that Jackson is retained for 2017?
I think it's realistic. They're going to give Hugh Jackson some time to get this thing together in Houston. A new regime, a new philosophy in terms of being able to play money ball. The more lotto balls that you have in the lottery, the better chances that you have on hitting on players. Again, they had all the draft picks. They've got 19 rookies on this roster right now. A lot of young guys, over a third of their roster is rookies. So it's going to take some time. Those guys are going to need some experience. And I think it's going to take some time for the Cleveland Browns. But the philosophy is sound. And I think the jury's still out on Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta. But I think they're going to have a success moving down the road. We just got to trust it and give it some time.
Let's move on to Marvin Lewis. Bengals lose again. Is it to the point now where Marvin should really be fearing his job?
Yeah, I think so, because you haven't had a playoff win over the last 5 playoff appearances, and now you're seeing your team implode before your eyes. They're not competitive in the AFC North this year. You're not seeing the style of football that you're accustomed to with the Cincinnati Bengals. The defense, which was supposed to be a strength of your team, has been lackluster. The offense hasn't looked the same now that you've lost Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu. Now Gio Bernard and A.J. Green are going to be missing extended periods of time. So it's going to be tough to see the Cincinnati Bengals turning this thing around this season. And I think you've got to look at the message. You've got to look at the head coach and say, maybe our program is not going in the direction that it should be.
All right, Chris and I will return a little later in the show to talk about whether or not the NFL will scrap Thursday Night Football as we know it. But first, let's go back to Maggie and Joan with a look at the already shifting fortunes in the college football coaching ranks. Maggie?
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, coaching hires in college can be clunky, but Tom Herman went from denying there were any talks with Texas to holding his introductory press conference 48 hours later. Joan Neeson is back with me. Joan, how would you grade Texas and Tom Herman's handling of this change?
You know, it's such a coaching change is such a funny thing in college, in all college sports, even in the NFL, at the NFL level in football. It's everyone deny until the moment the hire happens. And with Herman, I think there was a little bit extra of that just because his tenure at Houston was so short. He's moving to an in-state rival. But at the same time, we all saw this coming. We knew his ties to Texas. We looked at the open jobs. He turned down a couple of jobs last year, but those weren't jobs of this caliber by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there is a better way to handle this on both sides. But at the same time, it's really hard for a coach to go out there before the last game of his season, in a season where, you know, he had a super talented team that had hoped for more than it's going to end up with, and say, yeah, I'm looking around, I'm taking calls. I don't know how you handle it better, but it is this funny, you know, we all know one thing and they're all saying another, and we wait for the games to finish so they'll tell us the truth type scenario.
It makes for some awkward tape that we can revisit year after year. The Texas fan base wants a winner every year. We know that. What are the expectations for Herman in year one?
You know, I think you have to set pretty high expectations. You look at what he did at Houston, where he does not have anything close to the resources he's going to have in Austin. He, you know, came in there and brought that team from a, you know, American Athletic Conference. No one knew too much about them, had some up and down years, to a team that everyone was watching last year. And everyone's watching Texas every year already. So the stakes are a little higher. You also look at that recruiting class that Charlie Strong has in place, the 2017 class, that obviously was in flux because no one knew would Charlie be returning or not. But it was a top 10 recruiting class, and you have to think, you know, this hire is not going to cause many of those guys to change their commitment. You look at Tom Herman, you see stability. You see a guy who's brought a program to national relevance. You see a guy who's young, who's inspiring. I don't know how that hurts the recruiting class. So this team needs to win, you know, 9-10 games next year, I think.
What are going to be the challenges that Herman will encounter at Texas?
You know, I would imagine there's a lot of loyalty to Charlie Strong on that team, as all coaches, all incoming coaches face that. Not all, but the majority. And he's going to have to win some guys over. And it sounds like the situation there is a little dysfunctional. We know within the athletic department, it's a school where you have to please the boosters. You have to have the boosters on your side. There's a lot more glad handing than there is at a Houston job. And I'm sure Tom Herman will handle that with aplomb. But at the same time, that is a change and a challenge. And it's just the spotlight is going to shine even brighter. And he seems like a guy who's equipped to handle it. But there's going to be a lot more chatter surrounding him next year.
Well, as the coaching dominoes go, Herman choosing Texas means Ed Orgeron has the interim tag removed at LSU. Orgeron now has his dream job, Joan, but this is not a flashy hire or a big name, nor was Orgeron the first choice of the brass at LSU. What does that indicate about where the Tigers are right now as a program?
It's really interesting. I think LSU and Texas are probably the two most dysfunctional major powers right now, teams that, are in the conversation every year, but it seems like there's a lot of dysfunction from top to bottom at both of those schools. And looks like LSU is the more dysfunctional of the two. And that it really does say something about how things stand there. At the same time, I think we have to consider the fact that the market for coaches this season there just weren't big names that stood out. It wasn't like, if you don't get Tom Herman, you can get, Justin Fuente, who was a big name last year. Guys like that, there weren't. I mean, for LSU, the conversation seemed like it was, if you don't get Tom Herman, then, maybe a Larry Fedora, which I don't know that that's, necessarily that much better than Coach Orgeron. And he's a guy who's a great recruiter. And that's a big thing at LSU. They bring in this talent. They have that consistent talent. They need someone who can be a little bit better of a tactician than Les Miles was. And I think, Coach O has a shot at that, but there just wasn't another name that seemed like a really great plan B. So I wasn't surprised when I saw the news, and you can't fault LSU for doing what they did.
We know that Jimbo Fisher did turn down the job as well. There are reports, though, Joan, that Lane Kiffin could be joining Orgeron at LSU as offensive coordinator. What impact would hiring Kiffin have?
I mean, that would be a great boost to LSU's image in terms of getting a big name hire. Coach Orgeron was not that. Lane Kiffin is. And I think, hiring a guy away from Alabama into that position would really do a lot for kind of what LSU can say that it's been able to attract this offseason. And Lane Kiffin has proven to be a phenomenal offensive coordinator. And for a team with that much offensive talent, I think for him to step in, that would be really something. And it would be, I think, LSU could look back at this offseason and really tout what it had done if they were able to bring in Lane Kiffin.
Joan Neeson. Joan, we appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much, and enjoy conference championship games this weekend.
It'll be a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's rejoin Ryan and Chris as they dig into the possible fate of Thursday night football. Guys?
All right, thanks, Maggie. Well, you can add John Madden to the ballooning list of Thursday night football critics. The Super Bowl winning coach and former Monday night and Sunday night football analyst made his thoughts known on Friday about the NFL's Thursday night football experiment. Madden said, quote, "We're spreading it out more and more with fewer good teams, which makes it doggone impossible to have good games. Something has to be done about Thursday night football. It just doesn't work. It's not only a fan thing, it's a team thing. It's a safety thing. It's a competitive thing. It doesn't work. I know about money and I know about business. Maybe you have to tweak stuff a little more to help teams. Maybe you get a bye the week before Thursday night football." Now, Chris, yesterday reports surfaced that the league is taking a hard look at Thursday night football package, possibly could scrap the games as early as 2018. Ultimately here, what do you think ends up happening with Thursday night football?
Well, I think they're going to make some tweaks, and I'm not sure if it's more creative with the scheduling in terms of making sure that teams are not playing a Sunday-Thursday game. Maybe they're coming and playing a Thursday game off of a bye week. You just have to be creative in terms of that. But if you're trying to talk about teams playing in a four-day turnaround, it's going to be tough to have competitive football. It's going to be an inferior product. You talk about player safety being at the top of the league's agenda, making sure that guys are not put at unnecessary risk for injury. Then I think you have to address the Thursday night format in its current status. So looking at it, I think it's a good idea to look at it, to possibly tweak it, but we could be looking at the end of Thursday night football as we know it.
Do you think there's a chance the NFL could do away with Thursday Night Football altogether?
No, they absolutely could, and I think it would be a step in the direction of making the NFL must-see TV again. We talked about it earlier in the season about the ratings decline because you just have the oversaturation in the marketplace with pro football. You've got games on Sunday, you've got games on Monday night, you've got games on Thursday night. Toward the end of the season, after the collegiate regular season is over, you've got Saturday games.
Don't forget
so
the
it's
Saturday.
It's a lot of football, and I think fans kind of get to the point where it's like enough is enough already. So I think it gets back to making the NFL must-see TV again, which should be a priority for the National Football League because it's a great entertainment product when it's at its best. I don't think you necessarily want to put an inferior product on the field, and that's what we've been seeing with Thursday Night Football.
As a player, how tough was it to play on Thursday night? Was there just a collective groan in that locker room when you looked at the schedule? It's Monday, you said, we got 3 days to get ready for another game here.
Well, it depends on who you are in that locker room. If you're a young guy, anywhere from 22 to 26, you don't mind it because your body recovers so much faster. But when you got those veteran players in that locker room, guys that are getting in their late 20s, early 30s, it's tough to get your body prepared in that 4-day stretch to be able to turn around and play at your very best. It's tough to have a great game plan going into those short weeks as well. For players, it's hard to digest all of the information that's necessary in order to be able to execute your job at the highest level. So again, you're not seeing the quality of football that you're accustomed to seeing on Sundays and Mondays.
Handicap this, most likely scenario. Small changes, large changes, or they completely do away with Thursday Night Football?
I think it starts with small changes first, and I think that's the tweaking of the schedule, making sure that teams don't have to have that 4-day turnaround. That's what we're seeing this coming week with the Dallas Cowboys and Minnesota Vikings playing on a Thursday night because they played on the Thanksgiving Day game. So it had a normal work week, so to speak, with the 7-day stretch. I think that's what the NFL will try to move towards to see if that helps the quality of the product. But if that doesn't work, then I think we could see them do away with it altogether.
Big debate. I think we can all agree it has to be looked at. That's what the NFL says they are going to do. Maggie?
Interesting to see what happens with Thursday Night Football moving forward. Gentlemen, thank you. And that's going to do it for this Monday episode of SI Now. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern when I'll be joined by the world's fastest man and SI Sports Person of the Year finalist, Usain Bolt. Until then, stick with SI.com for all the latest news, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SI Now Live. Enjoy your Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.